Hello, in this lecture we're going to continue on the Economic Institutions, Chapter 3. We will be able to define market economy and compare and contrast socialism and capitalism. So we've discussed that already. We've described the role of business and households in the market economy, list and discuss the various roles of government. We're going to continue on this area at this time and then explain why the global policy issues differ from national policy issues. All right, so 6 roles of the government in the market. In its role as both the actor and referee, government plays a variety of specific roles in the economy. So note that we've discussed that the government, in essence, plays a role in that they're going to be a referee in terms of the activities of a market, a free market. So they are going to basically be the referees in the free market to see that the market is following kind of the rules of the market. And some of those rules could be things like we have to be honest and have the free information when we're out there and we're doing business. If there's an issue where we have a monopoly or something like that, the government may have to step in and say and say that we need to have competition within the market. These are types of things that, and obviously no coercion could happen within a market when people are doing business. You can't, threaten the other individual in order to set the business. We have to be free to make our own decisions. These types of things would be roles of a referee. We've also noted that the government actually consumes a large part of the consumption of the economy as well, and so they are acting in terms of a consumer in the economy and an actor in that way as well. And notice that there is kind of issues with that because, as we know, if we have a referee in a football game or something, it's very strange if the referee is actually acting in the game that they are refereeing as well, right? The referee is supposed to be kind of not part of the game. So we need to have some kind of separation on those two types of things, as the government does do those two types of things when we decide when the government needs to take an active role and when they're going to be a referee role. How can we separate those two so when they are a referee, they're not biased on any refereeing activities? So we have these things. We have providing stable set of institutions and rules. So obviously the government is going to need a stable set of institutions. Those institutions need to be stable. They need to be things that are consistent. They need to have a set of rules that are known so that they are transparent. We can know what those rules are, and those rules need to be somewhat consistent, because just like if we were talking about the rules in a football game or basketball game, we can't have that first down after 12 yards next time because that will greatly affect the game if the rules are changing a lot of the time. So promoting effective and workable competition. So as they promote effective competition, it's not like what the government is mainly doing by being the promotion of the effective competition is to play the referee. They're there to enforce generally the rules in competition, make sure that when people are competing that they are kind of following the rules and not violating other people's rights and rules in the competition, as well as looking into issues where competition may have some negative problems, which we'll look into later. Correcting for externalities. Externalities are things that can affect third parties within a competition. So if two people if A and B are in a competition, or are in a negotiation, I should say, not a competition. If A and B are in an agreement together, and that agreement could have effects, whether they be positive or negative, to C, to somebody else. And if that is the case, then we may need to take some action and account for the fact that there's another effect and externalities happening within that negotiation. We'll talk about that later. Ensuring economic stability and growth. Note that the government is also often tasked with this as if they have complete control over it, and they don't have complete control over this. I mean, if the economy is down, you can't really say, well, the government can go in and just completely fix it. They might be able to do certain things, but oftentimes people will argue that what the government needs to do is play the good referee role again, and once again look in terms of allowing the market, the invisible hand, to do what the invisible hand needs to do. On the other hand, there are times when we do note that the market does not work well in certain circumstances, and the government needs, in those cases, to take an active role in deciding when that is true, when the government needs an active role, and when the government needs to be a good referee and just set rules and not change the rules a lot so that people can play the game according to the set of rules. That's a difficult question. Providing public goods. So one of the problems we note with competition is that free markets don't work well in certain areas, and in those areas we might provide public goods. So that means we're going to recognize the fact that the market's not working in a particular place. We're going to say, okay, then the government's going to have to step in some way, either highly regulate and or produce it themselves, and so those are going to be public goods. We'll talk more about when those conditions are at a later time. Adjusting for undesirable market results. So undesirable market results could be things like a monopoly could happen, or if there's a pollution that is not being included. And again, we'll talk more about when the market could come to some of these undesirable results, what type of markets that would be in the case of. And then again, the government's going to have to decide, or we are going to have to decide when the government should step in, and should they highly regulate in order to control some types of negative results, or should they run certain pieces of the economy in order to run them because of these negative results. Market failure and government failure. So we got market failures are situations in which the market does not lead to desired results. So like we said, we do know that there are some items, some areas in which the market may not work well, and we know that there's some particular types of businesses that the market may not work well in. We know things like defense are areas where the market doesn't work well in, and we know that markets have a tendency, or businesses have a tendency to want to monopolize, which could be a failure in a sense in the market, because if someone monopolizes the market, there's no more competition, and we lose all the benefits that comes from competition, including lower prices. So government failures are situations in which the government intervenes and makes things worse. So the government, and we have many examples of the government, with good intentions going into a market and making things worse. And so that's not what we want to happen either. So when there's a failure in the market, or we have a perceived failure in the market, the question is, how can we deal with that? When should the government go in and fix it? When should the government maybe stabilize their rules and regulations and allow the invisible hand to work itself out? When do we recognize that the market might not be functioning well in certain types of businesses, and therefore we need heightened regulations? And how can we implement regulations in these types of areas and still take advantage of as many market features as possible that are advantageous? These are still open questions, highly debated, and very wide variation of policies that reflect these two things in different places. Policymakers must decide whether failure is the least problematic, or market or government failure. So obviously, again, we need to balance these two things in some way. Global institutions and corporations. The U.S. economy makes up about 20% of the world output and consumes only 6% of the world's land mass and just over 4% of the world's population. So that could be a testament. I mean, we could argue that these are obviously very round numbers, but if we have 20% of the world's output, meaning we're producing 20% of the stuff, and we're doing it with only 6% of the land mass and only 4% of the population, which are a few major inputs in order to get the output, that might be a testament of the market system, the more market system that we have being more efficient. That might be saying that you could argue that if that's the case, it's probably because, or it could be because, the U.S. tends to output more stuff. Their economy seems to be more efficient in some ways, and many would attribute that to a more market-based economy. If that is the case, then notice that a lot of countries that are developing countries, countries like China, who have a lot of labor that's not being fully utilized, then if they were to utilize those, if they could implement more market forces and increase their input and therefore increase their output, then that could benefit basically everyone. Sometimes in the U.S., we get kind of scared to say that China's economy could grow at such a fast rate, that could be a little scary, but at the same time, that could be quite advantageous if they were able to specialize in certain things and produce things that would increase trade, and that would increase the amount of things being produced overall. The pie would grow as well in that case. So U.S. economy institutions are integrated with the world's economy. So notice that the U.S. economy is all economies. We have a global market basically at this time. So we have integration with the U.S. economy and the rest of the world. Global corporations are corporations with substantial operations in both production and sales in more than one country. So many publicly traded companies, even if they're U.S. companies, of course, do have operations overseas. And again, this is another issue that will constantly be in debate. If a company, starts a plant overseas and maybe moves jobs overseas, you're going to see an argument on the jobs being moved overseas. There's two sides to this. Obviously, the jobs going overseas will be seen as a negative. The fact that the company may be able to produce cheaper products in that case could be a positive, because of course the consumer benefits from that, in that they're going to get cheaper products. Also, it also kind of could be argued that if the jobs are going overseas, they're probably the lower paying jobs, and if we were, the real thing that we could do is actually increase our skill level, and that would increase the higher paying jobs if at all possible. It could also be pointed out that some of these countries that the jobs are going to could be very in need of work, so that's not all bad either, but there is a trade-off in that. When jobs leave, there's a question of why are the jobs leaving in some cases, and of course the goal is that the company's doing is to find cheaper labor. And the question is, well, how can we keep some of those jobs here? Well, a couple ways we might be able to do it is one, increase the skill level of the workforce, and or make it more cost effective for the jobs to stay here. That's going to be a constant type of argument. Global corporations create jobs, bring in new technologies, and provide competition for domestic companies. Coordinating global issues. There is no global government to regulate global corporations, but governments have developed international institutions to promote negotiations and coordinate economic relations among countries. So we don't have any global government that governs all countries. All countries are sovereign. It's kind of scary to think about kind of a global government that would have too much control over everything. That could be a bit scary to think about. However, we as countries do recognize the fact that we do have a global market, and trade is good. We want trade because trade generally helps everyone else, as we've discussed before. Trade allows us to specialize in things, and thereby being good at what we're good at making and trading for the rest, that usually makes everybody better off. So some examples of international institutions. The United Nations is an organization designed to achieve international cooperation, but it has no ability to tax or enforce its policies. So United Nations enforce to have cooperation. Many of these types of organizations, however, do not have a lot of power to enforce the agreement. So there's a lot of negotiating power. It's good to get together and talk, but some of the enforcement may not be as strong in some of these organizations. The World Bank is a multinational international financial institution that works to secure loans for developing countries. And once again, the developing countries are countries that we have probably a lot of both natural resources and human capital that is not being utilized to its full potential. If it was, then we could see that the global output would probably increase substantially. There could be more potential for growth in those types of countries than in a developed country like the U.S., because in the U.S. we have a very low rate of unemployment, which means at least most people are working. We're putting that capital to work. We're putting the human capital to work. In a developing country, much of the country not working, and the skill level can be developed a lot more. And if that was done, again, everybody could potentially benefit from that, because that would mean a higher level of production for everybody. I mean, it's because they probably could get to the point where they're producing more than they are consuming. Additional examples of international institutions. The International Monetary Fund is a multinational international financial institution concerned with monetary issues. And the Group of Eight meets to promote negotiations and coordinate economic relations among nations. These 5 countries include Japan, Germany, Britain, France, United States, Canada, Italy, and Russia. North America Trade Act is an act organized, developed to reducing trade barriers between U.S., Mexico, and Canada. So notice what we're trying to do is once again promote the trade. We recognize that the trade is going to be beneficial to all countries for the most part if we can have fair trade. Unfair trade being things like double taxation for companies that would be taxed the 2 countries. We want to try to eliminate and find some kind of tax code that would be fair. Tariffs and things like that. We'll usually start trade wars, and you'll hear tariffs pop up every once in a while that we need to protect our jobs by either having tariffs or restricting companies from moving operations overseas. And a lot of these ideas, these free trade laws, are ideas saying, well, that's may not be the best way to deal with it. If we start having protective policies and tariffs and things like that, usually we've seen throughout history that starts a trade war, which means higher prices, and consumers oftentimes have problems there. So what we'd like to do is have good fair trade, free trade, so everybody is able to specialize and thereby reap the benefits that trade usually brings.